Hey there, I'm Sarah Hodges, and this is Executives Uncut, the live podcast where we get to know real executives and the challenges they face so we can provide practical solutions in today's world. Now, today, we're talking about new geographic business opportunities in a post-pandemic world. I'm here with Jim Tenzillo, Vice President of Invest Michigan. Welcome, Jim.
Thanks, Sarah. Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. You are one of the reasons why I love LinkedIn so much, because we just connected there one day and we've had a few chats together. We've become friends. We both had pandemic babies, right?
Totally. Yeah, it's
Yeah.
been a while. I think we met just before the pandemic, and we've never actually, I don't think, met in person, which is
We have
which is
not.
weird. Yeah.
Right. And I know we're going to be talking a lot about how technology and relationships and the pandemic have changed how we communicate and what we can do with business. But this is a
Mhm.
perfect example because there are so many friends that I have made in the last year that I have never met in person all over the globe. It's pretty cool.
Totally. Totally. I heard about a fund that's starting up where the two founding partners never met in person until like in the last week or so. So super
No
cool
way.
stuff. Yeah.
That is the things you can do. Well, and that's what today's all about. So, can you tell
Mhm.
us a little bit about venture capital, how you got into it, why you love it?
Totally. Yeah. So I got into venture capital. I when I graduated college, there was really no um, I didn't know venture capital existed. There was like your standard career path where you go join a big company and work there for, I don't know, 20 years or so. So I followed that path because there really wasn't, no one was talking about entrepreneurship or VC or any of that stuff. So I got quickly disenchanted with the corporate world and politics
Happens.
and reward systems. Yeah, totally. And it just wasn't exciting. But I did have like an entrepreneurial bug, so I wanted to explore that more. Went back to business school, learned about the wonderful world of startups and tech and venture capital. And I was like, this is for me. You're always learning something new. You're helping great entrepreneurs build the future, and you're making investments into the best ones. So I'm like, this is for me. And I was just like, I'm going to get into VC in the Midwest and nothing's going to stop me. But what I realized is there are very few VC jobs, particularly in the Midwest.
Mhm.
So it involved stringing together different jobs and internships while I was getting my MBA with startups and VC firms and putting together project work to try to make the transition from corporate finance to risky investing. So eventually I graduated, took a role at a startup, worked there for about a year, and then the
Cool.
opportunity came up at Invest Michigan, and I haven't really looked back since. Invest Michigan is a nonprofit investment firm. We were founded in 2014 to invest in early stage tech companies in the state of Michigan. We were originally funded by the MEDC and are now self-sustaining. We've invested in 54 companies and 14 of them have exited and gotten us returns back. So we are,
Dang.
yeah, so we are largely self-sustaining and we've had, great performance. We've made 121 investments into those companies. About half of them are led by women or entrepreneurs of color, which is something we're pretty proud of too.
Heck
Kind of
yeah.
shows, yeah, kind of shows the um, there's a lot of talk around diversity, equity, and inclusion in venture capital, and it shows that you can make really good returns investing in folks that have been overlooked traditionally. So yeah, it's pretty
Wow.
cool.
I mean, I hope that listeners out there realize that like a Michigan venture capital fund investing in, like entrepreneurs of color and women in early tech startups, all of that seems to not go together so well. You think of the Midwest, you
Totally,
think of cornfields and like old men with gray hair. You just do in business, right? Or like,
totally.
manufacturing. And listen, as a Michigan girl, that's fine. I get it. But let's talk about like how has the pandemic made it easier or harder for you to retell the story of what's available here in the Midwest?
Yeah, I think it really illuminated a lot of these areas that are outside the traditional hubs of the Bay Area, Boston, and New York.
Yeah.
It pretty much threw geography out the window for a year, and anyone could work anywhere. There were no geographic restrictions to talent, to capital, to resources. And it was, if you look at the statistics, Michigan was the quickest growing venture capital community by dollars deployed in 2021.
Are you
Um,
serious?
yeah, yeah.
That
There
is
was a
so
recent
cool.
TechCrunch. Yeah. So, I think what that shows is just that this dissipation of geographic barriers is a real thing, and um, opportunity is becoming a little bit more equalized from that perspective. Now, what I've seen, and you look at a city like Miami. Miami has actually thrived during the pandemic. A lot of folks left the Bay Area, left New York because they're paying high rents, they're living in small spaces, and they have to quarantine. So why would you want to do that in a small space and throw
Of
tons of money
course.
out the window via rent? So they flock down to Miami, and Miami's tech scene is like exploding. So
That's
um,
awesome.
yeah, so I think that those are some of the things that have happened. Now I think it's starting to swing back a little bit where people are heading back to where they were before the pandemic started. But
Mhm.
I think the trend of no barriers to taking a meeting with a VC or taking a
Yeah.
meeting with a customer, um, I think people have become accustomed to doing meetings over Zoom, and I think that's going to make for more efficient business and more opportunities for everybody.
Yeah, it reminds me of your suit story. Can you share your suit story with us? Which we did not. You've told me before. We didn't plan on talking about it today, but I think it's the
We
perfect
did not.
example about, geographic limitations and how they've dissolved.
I totally forgot that I told you that story.
Yeah, now I'm gonna make you tell everybody.
Yeah, when I was, thank you for that.
You're welcome.
When I was interviewing for Invest Michigan, I took a day off work and drove to stay with my in-laws who live up in Fenton, and I had a meeting the next morning in downtown Detroit, which was about an hour from where they live. So I drove all the way. It was about 4.5 hour drive from Chicago, and got there and realized I left my suit at home. So I'm like, okay, well, it's 11:30 at night. Like, what are my options? I have to be in Detroit at 10 a.m., probably in a suit. So I'm like, well, I could either get up really early, go somewhere and try on a suit and buy one and chance the fact that it fits perfectly, or I can drive back and go get my suit. And so I chose that route because I'm like, well, I know that suit fits me. So I just turned around at 11:30 at night after a long day at work and driving 4.5 hours and drove back. Got back to Chicago at like 4 in the morning. Took a hour and a half nap or so, and then just woke up at like 5 in the morning and drove to Detroit to interview. So yeah,
It's
that was
dedication right there.
yeah, and then interviewed all day. So there was a
Jeez.
lot of coffee, and yeah, that's that story.
Tell him what your boss said when you finally told him years later.
Oh, he's like, why didn't you tell me this in the interview? I would have just given you the job right there. And I was like,
Heck
well,
yeah.
either that or you've been like, man, this guy is flaky and scattered, and I don't want to work with him.
No, I love the dedication you had, but wouldn't it have been nice if you could just interview over Zoom and
Totally.
grab your suit and not even put the pants on?
Or put a virtual suit on. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, a virtual suit. You're like standing in a virtual baller office, like
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 that
I have
one.
right now, which is amazing. Yeah, and be
Yeah.
like, hey, look how cool I am. But
Yeah.
it's true, right? Like it's just you're able to have access to so much more talent out there
Mhm.
because the talent doesn't just exist in the major hubs like New York and LA. It exists even here in Michigan or in the Midwest or down in Miami and other places we wouldn't normally have expected. So I'm wondering, looking 5 years into the future, what's your prediction about how tech as a result of the pandemic is going to change everything?
Yeah, I think it already has changed a lot. I think the pandemic certainly accelerated a lot of adoption cycles. So you look at just even what we're doing right now, meeting virtually, that's become more accepted faster than it would have if there was no pandemic.
Yeah.
And I think the digitization of our lives is just going to continue. One of the big trends is in digital health. I mean, I think just
Oh, yeah.
healthcare in general and personal medicine. It's just such a broken system, and you have so many different startups and companies working towards solutions in that industry. I mean, that's a big wave that's coming here in the next few years. Certainly locally, I'd be remiss if I didn't talk about autonomous vehicles. That is certainly something that is a lot of money and resources going into it, and something that I think is going to be adopted, maybe not in the next 5 years, but certainly in the next 10 to 15, I would say.
Yeah.
So those are a couple of examples, but yeah, I mean, I think what this means for tech is that you can legitimately start a business from anywhere and get access to the best and the brightest. So you're no longer limited to what's in your backyard, which is pretty exciting if you're an executive or a business owner.
Yeah, it's kind of like with YouTube. Like anybody can become an entertainer, anybody can become a sensation. You don't have to get the right agent and the right deal. It almost feels like that's what the pandemic has done for business. What do you think about that?
I agree, and I mean I've started to see some companies in Michigan that are developing technologies that you would expect to be developed in Palo Alto, and I'm like, this company exists in Grand Rapids, for instance, and I
Yeah.
think it's not like a far-fetched thing anymore because you really can get access to folks that have worked in the Valley, and maybe they've worked there for 10, 20 years, and now they're moving back to Michigan because they realize they can.
Hmm.
And it's an exciting time in the tech world.
Yeah. So, well, then this is like the $1 million question, right? What do you think is going to happen to those hubs like New York and LA in 5 years in the future?
Yeah, I think they'll still thrive and they'll do quite nicely, but I think what's going to happen is some of these other hubs will elevate. So as an investor, if I'm looking at where do I want to put my money in the next 5 to 10 years, it's going to be in some of these underserved hubs or businesses that you wouldn't traditionally look um, to invest in. You know, if I had the choice of starting a VC firm in the Valley and competing against a bunch of other VCs, or starting an up and coming fund in a geography that's underserved from a investment and capital perspective, I think the choice is pretty clear. And I'm a little biased, but the investment opportunities are where the supply and demand of capital is in an investor's favor. And right now, there's a ton of good demand for capital in the Midwest, and there are a lot of firms in the Midwest, but not as many as there should be. So I think
Hmm.
that's a very real opportunity. Whereas, in some of the bigger hubs, you've got, you know, at the very least equal supply and demand, if not maybe a lot of money chasing a few really good deals, a few of like the top deals, I should say. Um, so that's the way I see it kind of unfolding over the next few years, just more spread out, more
Hmm.
evenly distributed across the country.
It makes so much sense. Like if you're a shark and you find this area with all these juicy fish, why would
Mhm.
why would you swim and try to eat where all the other sharks are and it's already red? You know?
Totally.
Like
Yeah,
fish where there's s- not as many sharks. Like
exactly.
totally. But so give us an example. You don't have to get specific, but what are some concrete examples of the fish that are available in the Midwest?
Yeah, I think we just had one. It's a fintech company called Autobooks. They just raised a $25 million Series B on Q1 of this year.
Nice.
So they're building out a legit fintech company that I think is going to be a unicorn. I mean, they're already well on their way, and they're
Cool.
building it right in downtown Detroit. And then you can look at some other companies too that have already reached that unicorn status. StockX, which is also coincidentally in Detroit. You've got OneStream that is in the suburbs of Detroit. You've got tons of great technology coming out of the University of Michigan and their tech
Oh
transfer
yeah.
office. We had a company called Tetra Therapeutics last year. They sold for 500 million to a Japanese drug discovery company.
Dang.
So the opportunities are here. They may not be, it might not be like Snowflake or Salesforce, but there are really good businesses exiting for very high multiples and creating a lot of value, which is exciting here.
That's so exciting.
Mhm.
So what tips do you have for, since you are a VC, like what are some of the things that you would want your startup founders to be doing in this post-pandemic new tech landscape?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think one of the things that I've noticed in the Midwest is that entrepreneurs tend to be a little conservative, and I think that's by like Darwinism, for lack of a better term. And I would say, given the dissipation of these geographic barriers, to just think bigger. And when you're out searching for who your investors can be, who your customers can be, um, who your talent, who your employees can be. I mean, there really is no limits, which is a blessing and a curse. So, a blessing in that you legitimately have access to everybody, but then a curse in that you have access to everybody and you've got to focus your time too. So, it really is like, if I was coaching a startup about customer discovery, it
Mhm.
really is like experiment with a lot of different things, and you can do a lot more experiments and experiment a lot quicker and iterate a lot quicker and learn. But then once you figure out what's working, it's really important to focus back in and execute on what you have found to be successful.
That's great. You can test, right?
Hmm.
Like just test and pilot much quicker with the tech that we have available. But that does take a certain level of, you need to put away the risk aversion because testing also
Totally.
means little mini failures over and over again.
Yeah. And that's all part of the fun in all of this.
Yeah,
But yeah, that's what I would say. That's like what I would advise startups to just think bigger and, um, you know, act like there's no limits, because in a lot of ways there are very few now.
that's that's awesome. Well, and that's the startup founders, but I'm curious, what are the discussions that you're having with your colleagues about this subject? Like give us a little window into what you guys are chatting about.
Yeah, I think like in the VC realm, one of the interesting things is that um, there are a lot of up and coming funds, like a lot of emerging managers that have come out of the pandemic. And one of the
Sure.
stats I just shared with you is 2020 was a great year for new business formation, and
It's
it's
amazing.
surpassed at least the last 10 years of business formation. So 2020, a lot of businesses were started, and on the
That's
VC
so
side,
cool.
a lot of funds were launched. So I
Wow.
think like when people were sitting at home, it was like either maybe they were laid off due to pandemic issues, or maybe they just felt like more empowered, or they had more free time because they weren't commuting. People were
Mhm.
just like, I'm going to start my own thing. And I think that's just a stat right now, and I think you'll start to see the fruits of that in the next 5 to 10 years too. So it's
That's
exciting.
amazing. So just everybody in the VC world is seeing this. They're seeing just more little ideas, little businesses popping up everywhere.
Totally, yeah, and I think that's also led, from what I see on Twitter, that's led to a craze in investment. So there are, we joke that like, people are sending out generic emails and they're just getting replies like, "Send me your wire information, I'll just send you money."
Yep.
Like that's a little exaggerated, but it's like the wild, wild west right now when it comes to funding small businesses.
Yeah, that totally makes sense. You don't know who's legit and who's not. And a lot of
Mhm.
people may have a good idea, but they don't know how to run their business, let alone prospect for
Yeah.
VC, it's or pitch. But well, so, there are a lot of different types of people who listen to this podcast, everything from CEOs to people just on LinkedIn looking for jobs to other VC firms. I coach a few of them, which is pretty cool.
Yeah.
So I'm wondering what tips, like if you could just give some concrete tips, what tips do you have for managing this changing geographic business landscape post pandemic?
Yeah, I think the biggest one is that um, the lines between home and personal life have also gone away quite a bit. Just in everyone working from home for a year. So I think that's led to more people being on 24/7. So I think it's still important to find time for self care and making sure that you're in your you're being your best self in whatever you're doing at the time, and making sure that like there is a switch to turn off work, and make sure you do make time for like family and free time and mental health well-being.
Good
So that's
advice.
one tip. Yeah,
Yeah.
for sure. Um, the other, some of the big themes that we're seeing, not even just with startups, but with more mature companies too, is the emergence of community and content as as differentiators. So one of my tips would be to think about how you're going to build out your own community and your own content. So find, whether it's finding or building your own community, like find people and causes and just awesome people that you want to work with, and build a community around it, because that's, from a company standpoint, from a personal brand standpoint, that's going to be a big differentiator going forward. And then on the content side, explore some of the things that you're an expert at or you feel like you can speak to, and develop a content strategy around it. Because um, like we've been saying, as barriers have dissipated over the last year, more and
Yeah.
more people are getting discovered. But it also leads to like, you've got to set yourself apart from the next person. And how are you going to do that? And I think community and content are two of the big ways you could do that.
Super smart. That's great advice. I love
Thanks.
it. Yeah. I'm not just blowing smoke too. I'd be like, okay, cool. Next. No, that's really
Yeah,
good advice.
yeah,
Very thoughtful.
yeah. Thank
Cool.
you.
Yeah. What else you got?
Um, Along the community aspects, we talked about this before. I got some advice yesterday. There are basically two types of people that try to build the tallest building. One type of person actually just goes out and builds the tallest building, and another type that just builds a building and knocks all the other ones down. And I think it's important to try to be the first one, because just in business in general, I find that it's a long game. And, if you're kind of a person who's difficult to work with, who brings others down, and it's like, I'm bringing you down to elevate myself, I don't know anyone who wants to work with those types of people. So
Mhm.
I would, when you're thinking about building, think about building the tallest, and not building and knocking other buildings down.
That's just a really timely tip too, because, you know, now with tech, people have more choice. They don't
Mm-hmm.
they don't have to work with you if they don't want to. And so if
Oh,
you're a
yeah.
dick, they can pass. There are 7+ billion people on this planet, and now we have access to many of them, many more than we did previously because
Mhm.
of technology. It's a great point.
Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah. All right. That's 3. Do you have any more? Because I'm kind of wondering, like, you're full of good nuggets today.
Yeah. I mean, the last one might be kind of cliche, but just follow. I think a lot of people have done this over the last year, but follow your passion, because your life is short. And if you're doing something that you don't feel challenged at, or that's just not bringing out your best self, it's not worth it. Um,
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, that I'm super glad that you brought that up because that speaks not to plug Hodges Coaching because this is your show today. This is the gym show and I want to make sure we plug all of your stuff, but that's why we call it the A plus method. It's finding out what an A plus in your life looks like. And an A is easy to get, right? Like these are my goals and I want to achieve them. But that plus, that elusive plus is about fulfillment. It's about
mhm,
living your life's purpose, having a mission. And that is tough and often requires a coach. So I think that people are starting to get that because of the
mhm.
pandemic, and everything changing, and it's a lot of people have asked for coaching and sought us out because they're recognizing how important that is. So I don't think it's cliche at all.
Totally. And not to plug this further, but getting an executive coach is one of the things that I've been encouraging a lot of our portfolio CEOs to do. And it's one of those things that, um, especially when you're running a startup, you have 10 million things to do.
Yeah.
But that one, it's something that's easy to fall at the bottom of the list, but it really does. The CEOs that I've worked with that have gotten executive coaching, it just gives them a more clearer picture of their business and what to do and how to execute and how to bring their best self there. And they all rave about it. So Yeah, just to further your point there.
Cool. Thanks. I'll take the
Yeah.
plug. Now let's plug
Yeah, of
you.
course.
Tell us where people can find you.
So yeah, I have started putting out some content similar to my tip on the
Yeah.
Medium. So I've got some blog posts on there, and I'll be
Cool.
continuing to do that whenever I have the time. And I'm also getting more and more active on Twitter, so you can follow me at For Real Jim. And Invest
Cool.
Michigan, our website is www.investmichigan.org. So that's where you can find Invest Michigan online.
Nice. Cool. And can people find you on LinkedIn too? Are
Oh
you
yeah,
open to connections if somebody wants to reach out?
totally. I'm on
Awesome.
LinkedIn. Jim Tenzillo
Cool.
should be yeah,
I know
should
that
be
was
easy to find
yeah, I know you're on LinkedIn because that's where we met, but I wanted to see if you were open to other people writing to you
for
and connecting to you, which is great.
sure.
Awesome. Cool. Anything else that you need to say?
Oh no. No, thank you for having me. This was a lot of fun, and as
Yeah.
always, had a great time chatting.
I'm so glad. Well, and I just want to wrap everything up, your amazing tips, with just a reflective question. This is kind
Mhm.
of a generic question, but I think it's important to ask for to offer to the audience so you can ask yourself. So if you're a business owner, a leader, or an investor, ask
Mhm.
yourself, how can you take advantage of the new geographic business landscape in the post-pandemic world? Have you really been looking at that, from that lens?
Yeah, I think one of the things, I guess the tip I would leave on that point would be to
Sure.
push your comfort zone a little bit, like push yourself outside of your comfort zone.
Nice.
Reach out to someone who's like outside of your network, whether that's geographic, whether that's from a
You?
business standpoint, industry. Yeah, exactly. Um, you know, there's so many different ways to connect to so many different people. So really try to push the boundaries of that, because you never know what conversation is going to lead where. And I think there's tremendous opportunity that's just now being, the surface just being scratched on that front.
Perfect. Thank you for summing that up with that extra little encouragement to push your comfort zone, find your growth edge, and get out there. Thank you
For
so
sure.
much. Thank you everyone else for tuning in to this episode of Executives Uncut. If you enjoyed our chat today, subscribe, share with someone who could benefit, and visit hodgescoaching.com for new episodes, or follow us at Hodges Coaching on LinkedIn or YouTube. Thank you so much, Jim, again for your
Thank
time
you, Sarah.
today. You rocked, and I'm Sarah Hodges, everyone. I'll see you in a couple weeks.